Hey, Josh, grab that door.
Yep.
It's Christmas all over again. Come here, John. Come here, sweetheart. I got a present for you. I dug this out of my stash.
Millions watched Thomas Weeks bleed, break bones, and rebuild engines on national television. Then, without a single word of warning, he vanished. Fans assumed something tragic had happened. They were wrong. The real story is stranger and far messier than any scandal could dream up. So if nothing bad ever happened to him, why has everyone spent years assuming it did? And who was really calling the shots behind the rivalry that made Thomas famous? Join us as we uncover whatever really happened to Thomas Weeks after Misfit Garage.
This is a 210 Sports Coupe. I'm telling you, this car's rare.
It has a rare, very, very rare hole over there.
You're hurting its feelings, okay? I can sell this car in any shape, form, or fashion they want to build it. That's why I'm not worried.
The answer nobody was looking for. For years, fans kept typing the same question into search bars. Whatever happened to Thomas Weeks? Some guessed an injury finally caught up with him. Others bet on a lawsuit or a retirement forced by money trouble. Reasonable guesses, considering how many times the show let him get hurt on camera. All of them are wrong. Thomas didn't vanish. He just stopped being famous, which is a very different thing. By 2020, 2 years after new episodes stopped showing up on Discovery, Thomas was back doing exactly what he did before any camera ever found him, talking about cars. He teamed up with an entrepreneur named Paul Baker and launched a small YouTube series called Hot Rod School. It wasn't a manufactured feud or a rival garage waiting to ambush him. Just Thomas walking Paul through a 1955 Ford Crown Victoria or a Lingenfelter Corvette, teaching the same way his own father once taught him. Same passion that made him a TV star. None of the exhausting parts. His personal life was even less dramatic. Thomas had been married to Michelle Weeks for more than 2 decades by then, and he did something almost nobody from that cast managed. He kept her almost completely out of the spotlight. You won't find a tell-all interview or a tabloid blow-up. No carefully staged "please respect my privacy" post that somehow gets more views than actual privacy ever would. He worked. He went home. Somewhere along the way, estimates put his net worth at around $800,000, modest by reality TV standards, and apparently exactly the amount of money a man needs to stop caring what anyone thinks of him. Thomas wasn't the only one who eventually lost a show without warning. 2 years before Misfit Garage disappeared, Discovery pulled the plug on Fast and Loud itself, the very series Misfit Garage had been built to rival. Richard Rawlings later admitted the ending felt like a perfect storm, though he never spelled out exactly what that meant. He simply packed up, left the network, and rebuilt his entire audience on YouTube instead, the same platform Thomas would eventually turn to. 2 men who'd spent years feuding on camera somehow ended up making the same career move afterward, which raises a question the show never answered. How real was any of it to begin with? So, if nothing tragic happened, and nothing scandalous pushed him out, where does that leave the mystery everyone thought they were chasing? It turns out they were asking the wrong question. The real story was why Misfit disappeared. The show ran for 6 seasons, from October 2014 to August 2018, and Discovery never once announced an official cancellation. It simply stopped getting renewed, and the men who built it found out the same way viewers did, by checking the schedule and realizing their names weren't on it anymore. Fans spent years speculating about Thomas's health, his marriage, and his bank account. Almost nobody asked the one question sitting in plain sight the whole time. Who actually benefited from a show that never had to explain itself? Because Misfit Garage was never just a story about four scrappy mechanics beating the odds. From episode 1, it was built inside the shadow of the very man it pretended to be fighting. Once that's out in the open, the whole rivalry that made Thomas a household name starts looking a lot less like an accident. To understand how that happened, rewind to the beginning of Fired Up Garage, back before Discovery ever pointed a camera at it, when the fight between the mechanics and their old boss still looked exactly like what it was sold as: personal.
So I knew we were on a crunch time trying to get this car done, get it over to paint. I mean, the body work on this Camaro is only supposed to take 4 days. But we're already over that, and it's gonna take at least a full day until it's done.
The landlord who owned the fight. Early 2014, two mechanics named Tom Smith and Jordan Butler got fired from Gas Monkey Garage by their boss, Richard, after an argument over a fan photo that blew wildly out of proportion. Both men were humiliated. The photo itself was almost nothing. A fan living with cystic fibrosis had asked to pose beside Richard's Rolls-Royce, and Tom and Jordan said yes without thinking twice. The shop manager on duty didn't see it that way, and a shouting match broke out on the spot. Both men were sacked within hours. What made the whole thing sting even more was that Jordan wasn't some random hire. Thomas himself had spotted his talent years earlier and personally introduced him to Gas Monkey Garage in the first place. The man who vouched for Jordan ended up starting a company with him, born out of the very firing Thomas had unintentionally set in motion. Rather than slink off, they decided to build something of their own, mostly just to prove Richard wrong. They needed hands, so they recruited 2 more Texas mechanics: Scott McMillan, a former Gas Monkey employee himself, and Thomas, a car trader with a reputation for turning a profit on anything with 4 wheels and a pulse. Together, the 4 of them opened a shop with a name nobody could say with a straight face: Fired Up Garage, which everybody immediately shortened on purpose to FU Garage. Tom always claimed the name came from an old sign he made as a kid, decades earlier. Nobody believed him. Nobody was supposed to.
The man already made his decision. There ain't no changing a man's mind. If he changes his mind, he's gonna come back in and give half-ass work versus full-blown work. So, the way I look at it is, ain't no big deal.
Pilgrim Studios smelled the drama instantly and sold Discovery on Misfit Garage, a fast and loud spin-off following 4 underdogs trying to outbuild the man who fired 2 of them. It premiered in October 2014, and for a while, it worked exactly as advertised. Fans picked a side. They wanted Thomas and his partners to win. What most of them never clocked, at least not right away, was who was standing behind the curtain the entire time. Richard wasn't just a rival mentioned on the show. He was the landlord of the building Fired Up Garage operated out of. He also sat as an executive producer on Misfit Garage itself, alongside Craig Pelagian and Eddie Rowetter. And according to industry reporting at the time, he pocketed somewhere around $22,000 for every single appearance he made on a show built entirely around beating him. Behind the scenes, that credit meant Richard had a hand in which arguments made the final cut, and which mechanic got framed as that week's hero, Thomas, most weeks. He wasn't some silent investor cashing checks from a distance. He was in the room, and with a second Discovery side producer, Craig Kaufman, also attached to the show, the feud had 2 sets of hands keeping it exactly as profitable as it already was. The villain owned the building. The villain had creative control over the story, and the villain got paid every time he showed up to get booed. It's less rivalry and more side hustle. Fans on car forums clocked it fast. One especially blunt post on the Vintage Mustang forum pointed out that if Richard was genuinely the executive producer, there was no version of this feud that qualified as real. Thomas and his partners still built real cars with their own hands. That was never in question. What was in question was whether the fight fans tuned in for every week was ever actually a fight, or a business arrangement wearing a grudge as a costume. So, was Thomas ever really the underdog fans thought they were rooting for, or a character written into somebody else's business plan? Long before any of this existed, the only thing he wanted to beat was gravity.
Two-wheel drive, you can't find two-wheel drive.
I know you remember when
You
these
see how
were
solid
new.
that was?
I seen the rust fall out when you shut the door.
Don't slam it that hard.
The boy who wanted the sky. Long before Thomas argued with Richard on camera, he was just a kid in Dallas, watching his father work underneath a car. His dad was a mechanic and a military man, and Thomas treated the garage the way other kids treated a playground, which is exactly the kind of decision that gets a 4-year-old a metal rod through the chin. That's not an exaggeration. At 4 years old, he leaned in for a closer look at whatever his father was doing and fell straight into an exposed, spike-lined section of the engine bay. It was the first entry in what became a long, almost comically unlucky list of injuries, most famously a wrist injury years later that had him wearing a support glove on national television. If there's a mechanic more accident-prone than Thomas Weeks, television has yet to find him. Even his lunch money went the same direction. His mother handed him cash for the cafeteria every morning, and most days he skipped the food line entirely, saving it up to buy Hot Rod magazine instead. He now owns thousands of back issues, proof that some obsessions start small enough to hide from a parent for years before anyone notices. But the accidents were never really the point. Long before cars took over his life, Thomas wanted something else entirely. He wanted to fly. He earned his private pilot's license at 16, years before most of his friends were even trusted behind a steering wheel, and he took it seriously enough to study aviation after high school. Then the sky said no. Thomas reportedly discovered he was legally colorblind, a condition that closed the door on a professional flying career no matter how naturally talented a pilot he was. No workaround waiting for him. No amount of hustle could fix it. Some doors just don't open twice. Most people would need years to shake off a dream that closes that hard. Thomas didn't have that kind of patience. He turned straight back to cars and stock car racing with the same restless energy he'd aimed at the sky. Stock car racing suited him better than anyone expected. Local tracks around Dallas gave him a taste of real competition, and by most accounts, he held his own against drivers with far more experience, chasing the same adrenaline that flying was supposed to give him. His father, a man who had already spent years balancing a military career with a passion for engines, never pushed him toward cars directly. He simply left the garage door open and let curiosity do the rest. It turned out to be the only kind of parenting Thomas ever really responded to. He bought his first car at 12 and flipped it for a profit. At 15, his father handed him a broken-down 1955 Chevy truck with one condition: fix the engine, and it's yours. By the time that engine turned over, Thomas had already learned the only lesson that mattered. If one door closes, he'd learned, the answer is to build a new one out of spare parts. That restlessness is exactly what made him such good television later. Nobody had to manufacture his energy or his habit of throwing himself at a problem head first without checking twice. It was already there, baked in by a kid who'd already lost one dream and refused to let it define him. The trouble is, once cameras started rolling, that fearlessness stopped belonging entirely to him. It became something producers could shape, repeat, and cut into a punchline whenever the story needed one. So how far were producers willing to go to keep that punchline alive?
You're walking out.
That's it. You know,
You're loading your tools up and you're walking out.
That's it.
What are we gonna do now without you? What are we gonna do?
You're gonna build it, you're gonna build it. But at the same time, just something I don't need to be a part of.
Written by accident. Once Misfit Garage found its rhythm, Thomas stopped being just a mechanic on camera. He became something closer to a running gag the show couldn't survive without. The guy accidents seemed to stalk. Every season delivered a new version of the same beat. Another cut hand, another mechanical disaster, another shot of Thomas working through whatever injury had found him that week. Fans ate it up. It made him feel human in a genre that rarely bothers with humans. But some longtime viewers started noticing how convenient the chaos really was. On forums like Vintage Mustang Forum, fans who actually understood mechanical work picked scenes apart with real suspicion. One widely mocked moment involved a crew member spray painting a drive shaft dangerously close to a running fan, sending overspray everywhere and threatening the whole build. Sharp-eyed viewers noticed the can wasn't real paint at all. It was Plasti-Dip, the stuff people use specifically because it peels off clean. Why would anyone risk a real paint job with something designed to be removed on purpose unless the crisis itself was the point? Then there's the one fans still bring up whenever the show's authenticity gets argued about online. A 1971 GTO reportedly crushed by a tank in Season 3 as a staged lesson for Thomas about respecting somebody else's build? A lesson about etiquette? Or a dramatic cold open dressed up as one? Nobody outside the production ever said. Underneath all of it sat a bigger myth the show never bothered correcting: that everybody on Misfit Garage was getting rich. Fan sites loved repeating that the whole cast had crossed the $1 million mark. The math disagreed. When the crew rebuilt a 1961 Ford Econoline and sold it to actor Danny Trejo, the build reportedly cost around $25,000 and sold for $27,000, leaving about $2,000 split 4 ways. Thomas argued at the time the real payoff wasn't the money. It was Danny Trejo driving around Los Angeles in something they built. Fair point. It also confirmed the underdog empire fans imagined was closer to break even. And this wasn't some struggling under-the-radar show either. Misfit Garage opened its first season pulling in over 1 million viewers a week, numbers plenty of cable shows would have killed for. And the chaos behind the scenes went beyond just Thomas. Jordan eventually left the cast entirely, replaced by a mechanic named John Klump, who reportedly almost walked off the show himself during a heated restoration of a 1959 Chevy El Camino. A revolving door of personalities cycled through the same Misfit brand long after any of the founders were still in the room. Thomas never asked to be the punchline. He just kept showing up, kept getting hurt, kept smiling through it, while editors clipped every mishap into a highlight reel, and the balance sheet told a very different story than the one airing every Sunday night. Eventually, the show that built this version of Thomas stopped needing him. Same as it stopped needing to explain itself to anyone else. So when the cameras finally did shut off for good, what was actually waiting for him on the other side?
I can't tell he was gone. I mean, to be honest with you, I can't tell.
Come on now. He made everything worse.
Look, man, I ain't trying to badmouth him, but
I'm trying to badmouth.
you know, hey, sometimes somebody just don't fit in.
The life he chose, when no one was watching. When Misfit Garage vanished from Discovery's lineup after Season 6 in 2018, nobody got a heads up, least of all the men who'd spent years building it into a hit. Thomas and his partners had already lived through that particular silence once. Nobody called, wrote, or thanked them on the way out. Most people in Thomas's position would have gone looking for a comeback, or at least a public complaint. He didn't. He did something almost nobody in reality TV manages. He just kept working. 2 years later, in 2020, he partnered with Paul and built Hot Rod School into a small, genuine passion project, touring cars like a 1969 Chevelle Malibu and whatever rare classic rolled through next, telling stories nobody had scripted for him. Just a mechanic, a friend, and cars neither of them had gotten tired of yet. His former castmates scattered the way most reality casts eventually do. Jordan Butler was actually the first to go, quitting all the way back in 2014 because he didn't want to relocate or start over with new partners. He went almost completely dark on social media for years until 2022, when he resurfaced with a simple post admitting he'd been in hiding and was finally back to wrenching again. Tom Smith leaned into stand-up comedy, working clubs in Dallas and occasionally New York, alongside whatever car work he still picked up. Scott McMillan opened his own restoration shop, Scott Rod's Garage, back in 2011 and kept building hot rods long after the cameras left, a career that seems far less surprising given that he'd already survived a near-fatal accident as a Marine in Iraq before he ever picked up a wrench professionally. Compared to that, a canceled reality show barely registers as a setback. Thomas's own life stayed the quietest of them all. 20-plus years married to Michelle, none of it playing out for an audience.
So my greatest accomplishments have been my failures, because I learned how to do something the right way, or I learned how to not push so hard, or I learned how to market a different way. A lot of people look at it and they're like, oh my gosh, Gas Monkey Garage, Aaron and Richard, they're,
Richard's own empire wasn't quite the fortress it looked like from the outside either. His flashy live music venue in Dallas collapsed into a multi-million-dollar legal dispute in 2020 and rebranded under new ownership within months. The man who spent years playing the untouchable villain ended up watching his own name come off a building, with barely anyone noticing. There was no scandal, dramatic fall, or secret tragedy explaining where he went. Just a mechanic who got handed a role for 6 seasons. An accident-prone underdog stuck in a rivalry that happened to be bankrolling the man playing his enemy, who quit playing that role the moment the cameras did, walking back into a life he'd never actually left. Richard, for his part, kept building his own brand and never once addressed what his role in that show meant for the men working underneath him. He gave no apology or acknowledgement. Consistent, if nothing else. Do you think Thomas Weeks and his partners ever really stood a chance against a rivalry Richard Rawlings was profiting from the entire time? And now that the truth about how Misfit Garage actually ended is out in the open, does it change how you feel about the show you used to watch every week? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.